You know, usually when we talk about personal finance and setting up a budget, there's this like underlying assumption that you are driving a car with a perfectly working fuel gauge.
Right. Highly accurate.
Exactly. You look down at the dashboard, you see you have exactly half a tank,
Yeah.
and, well, precisely how far you can drive before you need to pull over and refill.
Yeah, it creates this sort of false sense of universal predictability.
Mm-hmm.
Like the needle just moves at a steady, measurable pace. You get paid the exact same amount on the 1st and the 15th of every month, just like clockwork.
Right.
And, traditional budgeting advice is entirely built around that clean, reliable deposit.
But then you step into the world of freelance work or, gig work or commission-based sales, or maybe you run a small business. Suddenly it's like someone has taken a hammer, smashed the glass on your dashboard, and just ripped that fuel needle right out.
Yeah, you're driving completely blind at that point.
You really are. And traditional budgeting advice suddenly feels like it was written for, I don't know, an entirely different species.
Well, that is the absolute reality for a massive portion of the workforce today. It is the definition of financial vertigo. You never quite know if you are running on fumes or if you actually have a full tank.
Because the inputs are just entirely unpredictable.
Exactly. A booming month makes you feel invincible, and then a slow month makes you feel like you were just on the brink of ruin.
And we're looking directly at you, the listener, who might be driving without that fuel gauge right now. So, welcome to the show. Our mission for this deep dive is to unpack a concise but incredibly potent video guide we found that is entirely focused on budgeting with an irregular income.
Which is so needed right now.
It really is, because managing money is inherently stressful for almost everyone. But when you add a wildly fluctuating income to the mix, that stress doesn't just add up, it multiplies. I mean, it can paralyze you.
Oh, absolutely.
So we are going to break down the highly actionable strategies from the source material that take the mechanics of traditional budgeting and basically flip them upside down, transforming that financial panic into actual stability.
And I think it's important to note that the ultimate prize here isn't just about figuring out how to pay your bills on time. The guide is aiming at something much larger, which is removing the anxiety from the entire equation.
Yeah, getting rid of that constant low-level panic.
Precisely. The source material outlines a concrete method to maintain a consistent, steady lifestyle despite having an entirely inconsistent paycheck. It's really about systemizing your money so you don't have to rely on sheer willpower or, panic-driven adrenaline every time a bill arrives.
Okay, let's unpack this. Before you can even begin to allocate your money, you have to know what you are actually working with. I mean, you can't budget air.
Right.
If you don't have a steady paycheck, you are immediately hit with the first massive hurdle, which is finding your hidden baseline. Think of it like trying to predict the weather.
Yeah.
You can't just look at one rainy day or, one really sunny day and understand the whole climate. You have to look at a whole season.
That's a great way to look at it.
Yeah.
You have to shift your perspective from being an employee to operating like a business. Think about how a retail store measures its success.
Right. They look at the whole year.
Exactly. A store manager doesn't panic and just liquidate the business because foot traffic was slow on a random Tuesday in November.
Uh-huh.
They look at the quarterly or the annual revenue. They understand that retail has seasons.
Yeah.
And when you have an irregular income, you have to adopt that exact same macro-level viewpoint. You need the overarching data, not just the daily anomaly.
So the video guide specifically instructs you to track your income over several months. You have to pull the data from a wide enough window, say like 6 to 12 months, so you can calculate an average income. You add it all up, divide by the number of months, and that mathematical average becomes the foundational baseline for your entire budget.
Yes.
It isn't your best month, and it isn't your worst month.
What's fascinating here is the psychological friction of actually doing this. Because when your livelihood is irregular, your brain is naturally wired for day-to-day survival. You are in a constant state of reaction.
Oh, for sure. You're just putting out fires.
Right. But by forcing yourself to audit your past income over several months, like the guide insists, you are pulling back from the emotion of the moment. You are turning unpredictable chaos into a cold, hard, measurable average. And it just gives you a solid number to anchor your reality to.
I can definitely see the friction, though. Let's say you do the math. You look back at the last 6 months, and your average income calculates out to, say, $4,000 a month. But last month, you only brought in $2,000.
Yeah, that's where it gets tough.
The math says your baseline is $4,000,
Yeah.
but your bank account is screaming at you that you only have $2,000. How do you bridge that massive cognitive dissonance? I mean, your brain is telling you that you are broke, and this abstract average feels like a total fantasy.
Well, the dissonance is very real. And the guide actually acknowledges that calculating the average doesn't magically put cash in your pocket today.
Right.
What it does is establish the blueprint. If you don't know the average, you have absolutely no idea if your $2,000 a month is a catastrophic failure or if it's just a normal dip in a broader cycle. Knowing the baseline tells you exactly how much ground you need to make up during your peak months.
It gives you a target.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Gives you the target. Without the target, you are just guessing.
You have to diagnose the reality before you can treat it. So, okay, you've done the homework. You have calculated that average baseline. The immediate realization is that this average number has to, cover your life, which naturally transitions us to the absolute concrete floor of your outgoing money. Where does that baseline go first?
The guide is brutally clear about this part. It directs you to categorize every single dollar of your income into 3 strict, unforgiving buckets. You have essentials, savings, and extras.
Okay.
And the very first priority is defining the non-negotiables within that essentials bucket.
Yeah, the source lists the exact essential expenses you must identify to protect your floor. It lists rent, utilities, groceries, and debt payments. It insists that these are completely non-negotiable.
Right.
But I kind of want to push back on this a little bit, because putting debt payments right alongside rent and groceries in that essential bucket, I mean, it feels like it ignores how human beings actually behave under pressure.
It definitely forces a tough conversation about what we truly consider essential.
Because let's look at the reality of the terrible month. You are staring at a drained bank account. You literally only have enough cash left to buy groceries for the week or make the minimum payment on your credit card. Are you telling me this guide expects someone to put the debt payment on par with, like, biological survival? I mean, do I starve just to keep Visa happy? In a moment of panic, skipping a student loan payment feels incredibly negotiable.
Look, if you are in a literal crisis where it's a choice between caloric intake and a credit card bill, biological survival always wins.
Right.
But the video guide isn't talking about absolute bottom-out poverty here. If we connect this to the bigger picture, it is addressing the behavioral habit of treating debt as an optional dial. A dial you can just turn down whenever things get a little tight, long before you are actually starving.
Ah, I see. Treating it like an extra rather than a real obligation.
Precisely the trap. Think about the mechanics of what happens when you treat debt as an extra. You decide to skip a payment because you had a slow month, and you tell yourself, oh, I'll just catch up later.
And then the fees hit.
Immediately, you get hit with late fees, your interest rate spikes to a penalty APR, your credit score tanks, and suddenly, because your credit is ruined, you can't secure a new apartment lease, or your car insurance premiums go way up.
So the structural foundation of your life basically cracks.
Yes, by treating essentials, very explicitly including debt, as a rigid, non-negotiable floor, you are protecting yourself from structural financial ruin. You are building an unbreakable wall around the things that keep your life functioning.
Wow, okay.
The video guide is trying to save you from the compounding disaster that happens when a temporary dip in income mutates into a permanent hole of defaulted debt. You must protect the floor, no matter how much the ceiling fluctuates above it.
That makes the distinction much clearer. It's the difference between skipping a payment because you want to keep your Netflix subscription and your takeout budget intact versus skipping it because you literally cannot buy food.
Exactly.
The guide demands you cut the takeout and the streaming long before you ever consider touching the debt payment. You have to secure the perimeter before you can do anything else.
And that requires massive discipline. It really means redefining what an essential actually is. Because a lot of people blur the lines between an essential grocery run and an extra run to a high-end market for specialty items.
I'm totally guilty of that.
Right. But the guide forces you to strip the essentials bucket down to the bare metal. Shelter, power, basic food, and structural financial obligations. Everything else is an extra.
Which brings us to the most dynamic part of this entire system. Here's where it gets really interesting. We've found the mathematical baseline. We've poured the concrete floor of our non-negotiable essentials. But the reality of irregular income remains, right? The money coming in is still going to wildly bounce around that baseline.
It absolutely will.
Some months you will earn half your average, and some months you will land a massive contract and earn triple. So how does the listener actually survive the drops, and what should they do with the massive spikes? I think of it like a squirrel stockpiling for winter.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
Right. During a feast, like a good month, the instinct might be to just upgrade your lifestyle by spending heavily out of that extras bucket. But the source insists on a completely different approach.
This is the operational core of the entire strategy. This is where the guide really moves from basic accounting to structural engineering.
Let me throw another analogy at you. Think about how a hybrid car works. When a hybrid car is driving downhill, the engine isn't just coasting. It is actively using a process called regenerative braking to capture the kinetic energy of that downhill momentum and store it in the battery.
Right, because it knows what's coming.
Exactly. The car's computer knows an uphill climb is eventually coming. So when the car hits a steep incline and the gas engine starts to struggle, it pulls that stored energy from the battery to power through.
That maps perfectly to the guide's methodology. The downhill momentum is your windfall month, and that steep incline is your dry spell.
Right. So during a good month, when that irregular income spikes way above your baseline average, the immediate human instinct is to accelerate. You want to spend heavily on extras. You land a big client, you get a massive commission check, and you want to upgrade your life. You want to celebrate. You want the luxury treehouse, whatever it is.
Because you feel rich in that exact moment. The pressure of the irregular income briefly disappears, and the psychological release valve just opens. You feel like, wow, I've finally made it.
But the source insists on this completely different, almost counterintuitive behavior. It dictates the mechanics of what it calls a flexible spending plan. The rule is that a portion of your income absolutely must go to savings each month to build a cushion. You are deliberately charging the battery.
Yes.
If you have a massive windfall month, the guide explicitly says you do not buy more extras. You set aside extra savings. You capture all that excess kinetic energy. And conversely, when you hit the uphill climb and income drops below your average, you scale back entirely on your extras and you rely on that stored battery cushion until you earn again.
The guide uses a very specific phrase for this. It calls it a cyclical approach.
A cyclical approach.
Yeah. Most people view personal finance as a linear march forward. You earn money, you pay your bills, and whatever is left over at the end of the month dictates how much fun you can have. But this source is teaching you to operate in a closed loop.
Yeah.
You are essentially acting as your own insurance company.
You're underwriting your own risk.
Exactly. When an insurance company takes in premiums, they don't immediately spend all that money on office parties. They hold it in reserve because they know a hurricane is eventually going to hit. By deliberately and aggressively over-saving during your high-income months, you are literally self-funding your low-income months.
Wow.
You aren't relying on high-interest credit cards to bridge the gap during a slow period. You are using the surplus generated by your past self to rescue your present self.
Which is brilliant, but, it exposes the biggest psychological hurdle in the entire video guide. To act as your own insurance company and to actively charge that hybrid battery, you have to completely change how you define your lifestyle.
This raises an important question for anyone listening. How are you currently defining your lifestyle? Are you defining it by your peak earning months or by your true mathematical average?
That is the big question.
Because the source makes a massive promise. It says that this cyclical approach allows you to maintain your lifestyle without added stress. But that is only mathematically possible if your lifestyle, the car you drive, the restaurants you frequent, the clothes you buy, is anchored firmly to your average baseline, not your peak.
So if your calculated average income is $4,000 a month, you have to live a $4,000 lifestyle. Period.
Right.
Even in the month where you happen to bring in $10,000, that extra $6,000 isn't a license to suddenly inflate your lifestyle. It is the energy you absolutely must store in the battery for the month you only make $1,000.
Because if you inflate your lifestyle every time you have a good month, the entire cyclical approach collapses. There's simply no surplus left to fund the cushion. You end up making $10,000 but spending $10,000.
Right.
Leaving you completely exposed and vulnerable when the inevitable low month hits. And then you are right back to driving blind without a fuel gauge.
The discipline required to look at a booming bank account, see $10,000 sitting there, and tell yourself, no, we are sticking to the baseline, the rest goes into the cushion. I mean, that is immense. It fights against every consumer instinct we have.
Oh, it really does. But the reward for that discipline is exactly what the video guide is ultimately selling, which is the elimination of added stress. Think about the mental bandwidth you reclaim when a slow month is no longer an existential threat.
Yeah, that's huge.
When you have successfully built that cushion, a low-income month is just a data point. It's just a moment where the hybrid car switches over to battery power. You don't panic. You don't lose sleep, you just run the system.
What happens, though, if the steep uphill climb hits before you've had a chance to charge the battery? Like someone listens to this deep dive, they calculate their baseline, set up their essentials bucket, and then boom, month one on the new system is a terrible low-income month.
Yeah, that's rough.
There is no surplus yet.
Yeah.
How does the system handle the startup phase?
Well, the guide's underlying math implies that the startup phase is actually the most dangerous period. If you haven't captured any downhill momentum yet, you have to brutally suppress the extras bucket. You strip your spending down entirely to the non-negotiable floor we discussed earlier.
So just the rent, utilities, groceries, debt.
Exactly. You operate in a severe austerity mode until you hit a windfall month and can finally start seeding that savings cushion. I mean, it's painful, but it is a temporary structural requirement to get the cyclical engine actually running.
You essentially have to push the car up the hill yourself until the engine catches.
That's it. And once it catches, the momentum takes over. The overarching goal is to decouple your daily emotional state from your daily bank balance. The video guide is trying to get you to a place where your standard of living remains completely flat and predictable, even while your actual income is violently swinging up and down behind the scenes.
So what does this all mean? If we step back and look at the blueprint this incredibly efficient source has given us, it boils down to a very clear three-part system. First, you have to audit your past to find your future. You track your income over several months to escape the day-to-day panic and calculate a true mathematical average, and that becomes your anchor.
Right.
Second, you rigorously prioritize your essential expenses. So shelter, basic food, utilities, and structural debt. You treat those as a non-negotiable floor that protects you from compounding ruin.
And third, you implement that cyclical approach. You categorize your money into essentials, savings, and extras. You aggressively capture the excess during windfall months to charge your financial battery, and then you ruthlessly scale back on extras to rely on that battery during the dry spells.
And the emotional payoff for executing the system is huge. The source text ends by asking if you are ready to take control of your finances, promising that doing these things replaces the constant gnawing stress of an irregular income with genuine financial stability and confidence.
Which is life-changing.
It is. You stop reacting to whatever random number hits your bank account, and you start actively directing the flow of your money.
And, if we connect this to the bigger picture and take the source's theme of eliminating added stress just one step further, think about what this really buys you. If this cyclical approach successfully flattens out the financial anxiety of an irregular income, perhaps the true value of this budget isn't just about paying the bills on time.
Wait, really? What else does it change?
It fundamentally changes your entire relationship with your career. When you don't have a system, a low-income month forces you into a posture of desperation. You take on bad clients because you just need the cash. You accept terrible rates that devalue your work.
Oh, yeah. You grind yourself to burnout just to survive the week.
Exactly. But if you have that savings cushion, if you have truly underwritten your own risk, this flexible budget actually buys you emotional and professional freedom.
Wow. You have the power to say no.
You have the power to say no to bad work, and you have the stability to actually enjoy the wild, unpredictable nature of your career. You can appreciate the freedom of freelancing or running a business rather than being constantly terrorized by it. The irregular income stops being a curse and just becomes, well, the landscape you operate in.
That is such a powerful perspective shift. You might not ever have a steady, predictable fuel gauge on your dashboard again, but by following this guide, you build your own reserve tank in the trunk. And because you've done the math, you know exactly how far it can take you.